Daf Sadi Aleph Amud Beis, and we are about 10 lines up from the bottom of the Amud, Omer of Ash. Maybe it's 12 lines up. And we were discussing a svara of Rav Sheshes. If you recall, the principle of Rav Sheshes was that if she's not guilty of any sort of criminal act, then there's no knas. We'll waive the knas. And therefore, according to Rav Sheshes, if she relied before she got married to a second husband on the testimony of two witnesses, then if it turns out that these witnesses, for whatever reason, perjured themselves or they were unaware of the body, they didn't identify the body, whatever mistake might have happened, the first husband is alive and well, she can re-establish, she can go back to her first husband. We will not apply the principle of Teitze Mizeh Mizeh because she relied on two witnesses. There were other cases where she relied on the fact that the get was kosher, and it turns out that there was something in the get itself that was possible, and it could be that the sofer gave the wrong document over to the Baal, who in turn gave delivered the wrong document to the Isha. In those cases, we say, she should have at least read the get to be absolutely sure before she gets remarried that what she has in her hand is a get. But take it to an expert if you have any, 1% of a doubt. In a case where she relied on two witnesses and testified that her husband is dead, then we will not apply the knas. Let's take a look at the following Mishnah, which would seem to indicate that Rav Sheshes is incorrect. And this Mishnah is in Masechet Yevamot on Daf Pei Al. Shina Shmo Ushmo. The sofer made a mistake in writing the get. He was not accurate about the name of the Baal, or alternatively the name of the Isha Miskareshes. And anyone who's ever been Masechet Kiddushin and organizes the marriage knows that the first thing that he has to be knowledgeable about are the names of the couple, he and her, because of the ksuba. And the names have to be written very precisely, very accurately in the ksuba. Choice of names, spelling of names. In certain cases, a woman uses a secular name, but she has a Lashon Kodesh name, which names have to be written in the ksuba. And all this is, I don't know what word to use, but just in case that this marriage would be dissolved with a get, then the Masechet Gittin will look into the Kiddushin, meaning the ksuba, and based on the writing and the formulation of the names in the ksuba, they'll decide how to write the get. So writing names in a ksuba is a very serious business. It's the most complicated responsibility of all the responsibilities that fall on the shoulders of the Masechet Kiddushin. To know how to write the names of the husband and the wife in the get, in the ksuba. And now we're facing a mission in which the names got messed up. Now look, Rabbi said, truth be told, that if her name got messed up, that's less of a problem, because she's holding on to the get. And the get in her hands is a proof that everything was done properly and the get was given to her. However, with regard to his name, we have a very serious problem. And not only that, even if her holding on to the get is proof that she received the get, once there's a psul in the get, because the names were not written properly, then the halacha of, well, I'm holding on to the shtar, and therefore the shtar is going to testify on my behalf, that halacha is suspended. Because the power of the shtar in the hands of the Baal shtar to testify is because the shtar is kosher. But if the shtar was written improperly and there's a disqualification in the shtar can no longer serve as testimony. What about Shem Iro? The halacha requires that the get describes the city or identifies the city of the Baal by name, and for that matter, the city of the Isha, or Shem Ira. Now, Shem Ira would apply in a case, in one of the following two cases. Either if they've already been separated and they're living in two different cities, he and she, or even if they're still living together, but nevertheless, if the get was written in a different city, so that, again, the Baal is out of town. He really belongs to this city, but he's out of town. We have to know that he instructed the Aiden to write this get. And at least according to one school of thought, the name of the city where he's located at the time that he gave the Tzivui Abal and told the Aiden to write up the get, that's the name of the city that has to be recorded in the get. Now, here we have to raise the following question. There are two categories of psulei gittin. One is a lechatchila psul gittin, something that we want to add to the get, but it's not critical to the get. Then we have requirements of the get that are absolutely critical, they're indispensable. And the nafkamina is going to be in the first case, the get is valid b'di'emet if he gave him the get. But in the second case, obviously the get is invalid because one of the critical requirements of the get was not added to the get. In our Mishnah that we're studying now from Masechet Gittin, the shemos of both he, she, his city, and her city are absolutely critical to the get. And therefore, if she got married with this get, is teitze mizeh u'mizeh b'chol hadrachim ha'elu ba. She can no longer be married to her first husband, and as well, she can't be married to her second husband because she's an Eishes Ish. The get is invalid. But okay, if the get is invalid, I understand why she goes out of the second marriage. But why not resuscitate the first marriage? And the answer is, says Rav Ashi, Nema Mayav Leved, that even in a case where she was not guilty, because she had no clue that this get was a get puzzle, nevertheless, she'll be subject to the knas of Teitze Mizeh U'Mizeh against Rav Sheshes. So we could have written the next line in the Gemara, anticipating the defense for Rav Sheshes. Ibayla lakruye legita. She should have read the get. And if it didn't occur to her that there's a mistake in the get, she should have taken the get over to a baki, to a posek, and gotten a chavastas, final opinion that this get is reliable. And then she would go ahead and get married, fine. But she didn't do that. She jumped the gun. And as soon as she got the get, she went off flying and got married. So that even according to Rav Sheshes, she deserves a knas for relying on a disqualified get and getting married to someone else. And what was her element of guilt, which according to Rav Sheshes is the absolute requirement of knas? She was guilty because she didn't go through the get meticulously. She would have certainly discovered the mistake, or the expert would have discovered. So I want to read to you an embellishment here in the footnotes. He says, Rav Ashi Sovar, why did Rav Ashi, when he raised this objection to Rav Sheshes, realize that the answer is staring him right in the face, that she was guilty of not checking out the get? Even she ran the get. But it didn't occur to her that that nuance of a mistake would really be so critical that it would completely disqualify the get. So let's say, for example, they called her by a Hebrew name. They called her Leah, and her name is Louise. Nobody knows her by the name of Leah. She'll say, okay, so they wrote Leah. Why? Because in the interrogations, when they asked me my name, and I said Louise, they said, well, what happened, at your bat mitzvah party, 50 years ago? So she said, oh, there they called me Leah. Or they ask her, what did your father call you when he gave the Mishaberach after your mother gave birth to you? She said, oh, Leah. Leah is a dead and buried name. No one knows her as Leah, but that's her official name. So she figured that's okay. People today walk around with a Tudat Zahut that has a name in it. They have no clue where did that name come from. And then they remember that was a Hebrew name that they mentioned to the Misrad HaPnim. My father, Shalom, had a Tudat Zahut that said Bernard on it with Hebrew letters because they asked him what his name is. Most of the people didn't call him Bernard, called him by his Yiddish name, Berlev, or maybe by his Hebrew name, Tovarye. So this, according to Rav Ashi, is an anusa situation. She read the get. That's her due diligence. However, the answer that the Gemara gives to defend Rav Sheshes is that she should have suspected something. They wrote the name Leah. Who knows me as, who can identify me as Leah? I'm going to take this get. I'm going to try to use it as proof that my husband divorced me so I can marry another man. They're going to look at the get and say, who's Leah? Or Shady Row. Everybody knows the name of the city. It's not Chicago, it's Chicago. So he made a grave mistake, and she should have realized it. And even if she thought the get was kosher, should have at least been Mala Adas, what we call latest has something that maybe it's not a kosher get. And now he quotes the Aruch LaNer. Shebofanim hakodmim hoisa mara lechacham hayamakir b'tov. Aval shina shmo shma lo hayanika lechacham hatovos. Who ain't yodei shmos? The Aruch LaNer says that when you take a get to an expert, he'll certainly know whether the basic requirements of the get are there or not. Is the get kosher or possible? When it comes to the names, he looks at the get and it says Leah on the get. Sounds like a great, a very good, well documented get. Little does he know that nobody knows her by the name of Leah. He doesn't know her name. And therefore, the Gemara thought that she was an anus, because even had she taken the get to an expert, he wouldn't have recognized the psul. Rav Papa Saval remembered at Uvda, he wanted to paskin and rule in an actual case like Rav Sheshes, that if she was married after two witnesses testified that her husband died, and we find out her husband is alive, she's allowed to go back and resume her marriage with the first husband. My havi leilim. Rav Huna Breder Rav Yeshua Rav Papa Vasanya Kol Hani Mas Misa. We had a whole list of brises that we've been quoting for the last Amud of the Gemara to prove that we don't accept the principle of Rav Sheshes of my havi leilim. Amalei, so Rav Papa responded to Rav Huna, Lav Shaninu. Didn't we give an answer to defend Rav Sheshes on every single objection, every single question? Okay, we gave answers. You ask a kash on an amor, you have to find some sort of teretz. But that doesn't mean that because we came up with an answer, we should pass it like it. And this is what's called terutzim dechukim. When you give a kvetch and you push into a brisa, a reinterpretation in order to defend and reconcile it with one sheet. But we don't rely on a teretz dachuk when it comes to psak halacha. A teretz dachuk is very good in a masu matan, in a deliberation about the opinion that was expressed. As far as halacha l'maisa, go with the simple reading of all these prices, and we're going to apply Teitzim Mizel Mizeh, even in a situation of my Havile Limel. When I was in yeshiva, they used to call it a kvetch teretz. I don't know if you ever heard that phrase. We kvetch harayin a teretz. We'll push it in. We're not going to rely on such teretz. Amar Avashi. The Mishnah says we're going to impose all these knasos when we find out that the husband is alive. Where is the husband? Is he standing in front of us? Can we see him physically? That's one thing. Then we know he's alive, for sure, without question, and we're going to impose all the knossos. But don't think, says Rav Ashi, that we're going to rely on a kol. The rumor has it that he's out there alive. He's sunning himself on the beaches of the Caribbean, Bermuda, of Acapulco. I don't know where he is. No. We're not going to impose these knossos until we're absolutely sure Bezdin has the guy in front of him and he's breathing. But if he's who knows where, and the rumor has it that he's alive, we don't rely on a kol. And Rabosa, I have to tell you, I wonder what would be in contemporary life. Because as you know, the very fact that you're with me today, except for Steve over here, means that there are ways of knowing someone is alive if he opens their camera. In this case of the members of our group, I know that John is alive because I can see him. Not sure if Ben or Don are here. Again, they always claim that they're going to fix up their cameras, but right now, Basher Sham, I don't see them. So there's only a rumor that they're alive. But John, I can see with modern technology. Today, you can pick up a phone, make a phone call, and see the guy who is in, maybe even in Afghanistan. Maybe the din would change to it. I don't know. So now the Gemara says, what kind of kol are you talking about? When did you hear this kol? Hey, kol. When did this kol that the Baal is alive, come out, so to speak? Because again, you want to allow her to remain married to the second husband when there's a strong rumor that claims her first husband is still alive. Did she go ahead and have the chutzpah of getting married to the second guy after she knew about the kol? Meaning the kol was out there. The rumor had it. Everyone is talking about the fact that the guy is playing poker somewhere in, I don't know where, in Yehovah's. And she went ahead with all the audacity and she got married to a second man. All right, you're going to tell me that she got married and then we heard the kol. That's something I can understand. She was unaware of the kol. We were unaware of the kol when she got married. Then you can tell me, you know what? We're not going to bust up a marriage based on a kol. And not only that, when she got married, she's purely innocent. There's no reason to impose any sort of knas on her. So the Gemara has a technical problem. So again, now just to review, the Gemara has justified Rav Ashi in a case of kol lebasar nesu, where this kol came out after she got married to the second husband. The second marriage has what's called a chesgas ishus. And we will not break that up unless we know for sure that the first husband is alive. There's no reason to impose a knas, because when she got married to the second husband, there was no kol. It didn't exist. Excuse me, I just want to close the window. Can't hear myself think, and I'm screaming my gut cuts out. So the Gemara says that's a very logical way of explaining Rav Ashi. In a case where there was a kol before she got married, she deserves a knas. We're not going to let her continue in this marriage. The kol is enough to prevent her from creating a new ishus. And if she violated that, we're not going to recognize that second marriage. Rav Ashi's point is still well taken. In a case where she had every legitimate right to get married, and now the second marriage has a cheskas ishus to it, we're not going to break up that cheskas ishus because we heard a rumor. Says Rav Ashi, now we need the husband physically in front of Bezdin. We have a technical. Why is Rav Ashi making this point in this context as if he was machadesh, he discovered America? Ha'amar Rav Ashi had a zimna. Rav Ashi, in a different context, already went on record as presenting the same ruling. The Amar Rav Ashi, and here we turn to Daf Tzadi Beis. Kol kol de basa nesuin lo chayshina. We pay no attention to a kol, to a rumor that would bust up a marriage, and the kol came into existence after the marriage. Why does Rav Ashi have to repeat himself? What chiddush is he adding to his original statement? The Gemara answers very beautiful. How this same I would have thought. What happened was, in the case of our Rav Ashi, she shows up in Bezdin and she says, my husband died. And she's asking Bezdin to allow her to get married to another man. This Sharina, Bezdin said, look, we only have the evidence that we can go on, 2 witnesses who testified that your husband died. Go ahead and get married. They gave her the license. But she showed up in Bezdin. Why is that important? Says the Gemara, Kola de Kami Nesuin Dami. Kola, the Chaf HaDinyon, tells me that in this case, it's almost as if there's a kol, a voice, meaning a rumor that we're aware of in Bezdin before she got married. And therefore, Rav Ashi would agree that in this case, we cannot recognize her marriage. Itaser, and therefore this kol, when it comes out, even though technically it came out after the sun, is going to force us to bust up the marriage. Amash Balan, no. It's still considered technically a kol li'acharnis. So let me read to you a little bit of background here, what the Gemara is vacillating. What is exactly the scenario of the case? Isha. The first husband was a Kohen. She grusha ozona. The kol went out that she is not allowed to marry a Kohen, that she had a previous marriage before this one, and she was divorced from her first husband. Since Rav Ashi, since the Kol came out after she was married to a Kohen, we can still validate the marriage. We will not break up a marriage based on a Kol. If that Kol came to our attention after she got married. Comes along Rav Ashi with another chiddush. The Gemara says, "Ha'omer Rav Ashi chad zimna." In the case of the Kohen, he's already gone on record with a ruling that we will not break up a marriage to a Kohen when we hear now rumors after she got married to the Kohen that she was a zona, she was a grusha. In Cain, if that be the case, why is Rav Ashi repeating himself? And perhaps Khan, afilu ba kol lifnei nesuin ein choshishin. Are you going to tell me that Rav Ashi is telling us that even if there was a kol before nesuin, nevertheless, if she went ahead and got married, we're going to allow her to remain married? That doesn't sound like Rav Ashi's language. He wrote kol kol debasa nesuin lo chayshina, implying that if there was a kol before the nesuin, then chayshina, and we will break up the marriage. So we're going to have to assume that if Rav Ashi is coming to be machadish something, he's not being machadish that a kol before nesuin would not be mavata. A kol before nesuin, clearly, I mean, it's a definite implication, would break up the marriage. But we have a case of kikola, the kami nesuin. The kol was we were unaware of the kol before she got married. But we have a case where it's like a kol that came before nesuin. In the case where she married a Kohen, if the Kol was before she married the Kohen, that she's a Grusha, then we will not tolerate and recognize the validity of her marriage to the Kohen. So too, if the Kol came out before she married the second guy, that her first husband is still alive, we will not allow the second marriage to be a valid marriage. But what about a case in the middle ground, where the kol technically came out after the marriage, but it's kikola kame nesuin dom. It's as if the kol came out before the nesuin. Rashi on the second line from the top says, "Hoil v'hutzrecha lavo lebezin lahatiru alma b'chai havim mesafkinen lakodim nesuin." Rashi says the following: we didn't hear that he died. We didn't hear that he's alive. She came to Beis Din and presented this testimony of two witnesses. Once she has to come to Beis Din, what that means is that until Beis Din will deliver a heter, meaning a ruling that she's allowed to get remarried, the assumption is that her husband is still alive. So Beis Din were already in a mode of believing that her husband is still alive. That itself is considered like a code. And therefore, when let's go back to the basics. If the kol came out before the nesuin and there's actually a kol, Beis Din now has reason to believe that he's still alive. And therefore, they will not allow her to get married. And if she gets married, they'll bust up the marriage with all the knossos and all the severe penalties. Why? Because there was a kol before she got married. What is the purpose of that kol? What does it accomplish? In the Havamim in the Gemara, it accomplishes a suffix. The kol, although it's not reliable evidence, is enough of a doubt So the Beis Din will say, we don't know. Maybe your husband is still alive. You're not allowed to get remarried. The Havamina of Rav Ashi was that if a woman comes to marry a Kohen, so the Rav HaMasechet Kedusha will marry her off. Maybe he'll ask her a couple of questions to investigate. But he has no reason to assume under the sun that she's a Zono or a Grusha. Unless there was a call. If there was a call, then he's very wary and very suspicious. He's not going to be Masechet Kedusha and allow her to get married to a Kohen. So in any case that a man wants to get married to a woman, and the question is, what's her personal status? And is she attached to a different husband, or is she possible for marriage because of this, that, or the other thing? Maybe she's a mamzeres or whatever it might be. We don't have any rumors. We don't have any reason to suspect. There are no suspicions whatsoever. Go ahead and get married. But in a case of a woman who is married, or at least was married, now we need Beis Din to raise the possibility that her husband is alive, block her from getting married. That's exactly like a kol. That accomplishes the same goal as a kol. And that's what Rashi says, no one is going to be Masechet Kedusha to a woman who is married. If she can produce a get, that's a different story. But she doesn't have a get. And now that she's claiming a whole story that her husband, he went out to battle and he didn't come back and he died in battle. That requires Beis Din to remove her status that she had as a Vadei Eishes Ish and assume that her husband is dead. Where's his dead body? We don't have that. That's at least a suffix that's no less insignificant than a kol. Kol meaning that gives us reason to believe that she cannot go ahead with this marriage until we clarify what happened to her husband. And therefore, we're not going to allow her to get married. If she goes ahead and gets married, we're going to penalize her and break up the marriage. Amash Malon. No. There's no such thing as kik kol. If there are two witnesses in front of Beis Din that testify to the fact that her husband is dead, then there's no suffix. Whatever suffix might have happened, let's say, for example, had she shown up in front of a local rabbi and say, well, I want to marry this second man. What about your marriage to your first husband? Well, he died, So the Rav HaMasechet is not going to touch this with a 10-foot pole. What do you mean he died? Prove it. For that, you need a Beis Din. To change your status as an Eishes Ish, right now you have a Cheskes Eishes Ish. Now she shows up in Beis Din. Does Beis Din have a suffix? Well, it depends. Before the Eidim come in to testify, Beis Din has a suffix. They're not going to allow her to get married. Now that the Eidim came in, we can rely on the Eidim. And any chazok and any premise and assumption that we had until now about her status is gone. Unless there's a call, but there's no call. We went, we gave a license, she got married, and now all of a sudden we hear a call. We're not going to bust up her marriage as if to say that she had no right to get married. How can we touch that marriage? It has a life of its own cheskes ishus. And there was no call before she got married. So call has a power, but it doesn't have a power. It's right there in the middle. Call has a power to create a suffix when you have a cheskes isur. And the call is coming to support a cheskes isur. Her status is that she's an Eishes Ish. We have a call that her husband is still alive. No way will allow her to get married. And the marriage itself inherently is lakui. It's what word am I using? But it's disqualified. But if on the other hand, a call would come out After she's established a cheskes eishesish, then the kohl is not in. Then the only way we'll break up this marriage or impose the knossos is when the Baal physically, our first husband, comes into business. Those are the rules of the game. Okay, Rabbi, so let's see, make a note of where we got up to, because tomorrow, we start a brand new sugya. Here on the top of Daf, Sadi Beis Amud Aleph, with Niseis, Alpi Bezdin, on line 3. That's where we'll pick it up in Mirza Hashem tomorrow on Yom Sheni.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Okay, thank you so much. And again, if you ever have a question about the link and where to find it, hopefully you have an email of mine. I don't care, it could have been a year ago that you had this email. Things haven't changed much. All the links are there on the email. Number 2, as far as a code word is concerned, I'm going to say this publicly, it's 613. And it remains that way because, as we learned in this week's parasha that we read yesterday, we can't change the Torah. The Torah is what it is. And there's no 614 and no 612 or anything like that. Everyone should have a great day and a great week.